Welcome back to Solomon's Porch with your host, Jason.
And Shawn.
Oh, is this your kind of exotic introduction into this topic?
Yes, welcome to the Solomon's Porch.
All right, so just beware. This is adult content, this segment, so don't play this out loud with kids around. I don't know what we're
No,
going to say, so that's why the warning is coming. We're not intentionally going to say something that's, like whatever, but uh but we're definitely going to talk about some stuff because this segment is called Sex on the Porch. That's the title of this topic. And we kind of talked about this a long time ago, back early days of the show. And so we figured we'd address it again. Obviously, we've grown and matured in our walk with Christ. And we've been married like 3 years longer now. And we're on YouTube now. And we got new listeners and all that good stuff. So I figured it'd be good for us to, well, actually, you figured it'd be good for us to talk about it again. And with Valentine's Day coming up at the time of this recording. So jumping off, one, the church really doesn't talk about sex openly enough. I feel like it's that weird taboo subject that nobody wants to touch. And I don't know if it's because they don't want to talk about it around kids or if they just feel like it's so personal, which it is, that it should only be kept between a husband and wife and never mentioned anywhere else before. And I feel like that's why it's ending up in a bad situation in a lot of marriages, even Christian marriages. So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, especially with Valentine's Day coming up, is objectification. Shawn, you want to kind of dive into that?
yeah. Well, real quick, we've called this segment "Sex on the Porch." Have you ever had sex on your porch?
No, I have not.
I, I,
I
I
have not.
totally have had sex on our screen porch. So, there's something exciting about that. Not necessarily to where, people are going to see us or anything like that, but you're outside and it's a different environment, and spice things up a little bit.
And you got a hammock too,
Objectification.
right?
Well, yeah,
Okay,
there's
okay.
that.
Let's not get into too
Yeah,
descriptive
yeah.
territory.
So anyway, but the healthiness of the of a marriage um, is there's a good portion of that is dependent upon on your sex life, and so a lot of that comes down to communication. When my wife and I went through marriage counseling, one of the things that I had expressed that was a absolute necessity for me was communication, because I felt like so long as we could communicate with one another, whether we're having financial issues or a disagreement about or a challenge about how to raise our children, whatever was going to come up, whose house we were going to for Christmas Day, whatever it was, uh, communication was paramount. And so, if we could not learn to communicate with one another, we were going to have a breakdown within our marriage. And so, that has to naturally extend to sex. And so having some time to be able to do some bedroom talk, by the way, guys, don't ever do it right after having had sex, okay? So you got a question, you wanted some feedback about something, whatever. Um, wait until like maybe you're two of you are in the car and you're going somewhere and it's just the two of you. Say, hey, honey, whatever your question is, but definitely talk about it. You need to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, whatever she's doing, whatever your desires are, whatever her desires are being communicated. um Not everything can take place either, though. So, and that's where I think part of this objectification comes into play for a lot of guys. um if you have been a guy that um had a good amount of life that you've lived before you were saved. So, meaning you probably have some pornography experience. Objectification is something that almost comes as a natural extension of having consumed pornography. And because it's always just a means to an end. So then you begin to see um, the woman in your life, the wife in your life, as the object to which you get gratification.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then you also have a tendency to say, I can only get gratification if she does this. Then I get mine. Um, and there's some things that some people just don't do, that they're not comfortable with doing. They're not willing to go there, or it has some other kind of negative emotional impact on them. It could be something that kind of goes back to some other trauma that they've had, um,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. So you may prefer to have some anal intercourse. Well, she may not particularly want that because that's something that maybe was traumatic for her. Honestly, we go to the doctor and you go to the proctologist, and I'm like traumatized for months on end afterwards. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but just the point is that there are all sorts of other things that you need to take into consideration. So discussing these things with your spouse is absolutely essential, and that's where we then take um, your other half to this equation, and you validify them. You give them their due respect, and you were lifting them up and creating them as an equal, as opposed to um, just hey, you're here to please me.
Yeah. I think we have to have that reciprocation in mind. So, it's like, how can I best please her instead of how can I use her to get this release? And something else that we got to understand, I wanted to piggyback off what you were talking about on what people are comfortable doing, not doing. One of the things that you got to understand is women have, statistically speaking, women go through more sexual trauma than a man does. And they obviously, with women having women friends, they hear about a whole lot more sexual trauma than we ever do. Because they have friends who have gone through terrible things, or their mothers may have, their cousin may have, their aunts, their grandmas, so many other women they're connected to. So all of these stories get spread. I mean, not like lies, but like these experiences that they've heard of. And you got to think about it when you're the the male, the man that is the only sexual partner your wife has. You know, you got to be the trustworthy person that doesn't feel like he's forcing his preferences on her,
Right.
because so much of what she's probably heard is how men have forced themselves on upon other women. And so we got to understand, like, this isn't about just me getting my sexual gratification met. This is about us connecting together. Like, I'm not saying sex is not or can't ever just be a release for the two, but I feel like it needs to be understood. There needs to be clear communication on, what are boundaries that we are going to adhere to, and you should want to know what she's comfortable with, and not just want her to know what you want. And so I think that communication, Shawn, is extremely clear. And just to kind of continue on with that, in Genesis 4, and I tell people this all the time, is, one of the things is, sex is the most intimate way you get to know somebody. And it says in Genesis 4 1, now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. And so it's the most intimate way of knowing somebody. Even whenever, God references adultery, it's because, like, they went to, kind of go be with other gods, false whatever. But he equates that oneness between his people and himself, as a knowing, as an intimate relationship. And so one thing you want to know is, and I think this is why it's sexist for a marriage, is because that's like almost the last step in getting to know somebody. That's like the thing that connects that. Now I know you in every possible way that I can at this moment. And
Sure.
uh and so anyway,
Or or at least it should be, yeah.
yeah,
A lot of folks have a tendency to take the Ephesians 5:22 scripture out. Say, wives, submit to your husbands, and it's like, okay, but did you read the rest of it? It- you know, um,
well, that's not even
it
talking
then
about
says,
like
it goes on to say, husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is head of the church. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Now, what does that mean?
right,
Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands and everything. Oh, wait. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by washing through the with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or blemish, but holy and blameless. And it goes on. I'm just saying, you know, let's make sure that we're really putting this into full context. It isn't, oh well, it says that you're supposed to submit to me, so I want to have sex. So get over
right,
there and
right,
let's get on with it. Part of all of that is that as you, as the head of the household, as men, of course we're speaking as men, so ladies, if you're watching this or listening to this, I apologize. I can only speak from my perspective, obviously.
yeah,
But to be able to say that um, he has actually the burden of lifting her up,
yeah.
to making her more important, to sacrificing himself for her glory. Oh my goodness, what? I'm just saying. So really, guys, honestly, your sexual gratification comes secondary as far as I'm concerned. If you want to use this scripture that way, that's what I would pull from that. But it, there otherwise isn't anything else that really speaks about sex, unless you're getting into the Song of Solomon, which is very erotic and fun to read with your wife sometime.
Well, I was going to point out 1 Corinthians 7. So, just real quick, I'm just going to do a couple verses. It says, now concerning the
Amen.
matters about which you wrote, it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman because of the temptation. Wait. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband, this is verse 3, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. It's interesting because he points out that the husband owes his wife that gratification. Like he addresses him first.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, it's your responsibility to make sure she's good before you're good.
Well, and we'll go ahead and get a little more graphic, I guess.
Okay, let's
Um,
dive into it.
guys, guys are going to come. They're going to ejaculate. That's almost heck, we could at some point in time during puberty, we could rub up against a wall hard enough and we'd just in our pants. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So it's not a
Deep dive.
matter of whether or not we're going to have that release. Now, granted, ejaculation is different than orgasm,
Right.
but at the same time, though, most men are usually quite content with just simple ejaculation. Okay, I've done it. I'm good. Let's move on. Which is why sex is usually a very short process for, unfortunately, so many folks. Whereas when we take that scripture and we say, okay, well, if this is if the primary focus needs to be a sexual gratification on her part, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, am I communicating to my wife? Am I asking her, what is it that you need or want?
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to that communication. So, a lot of people call it foreplay, whatever. Um, to me, for using the term foreplay is more like a mandatory kind of thing. Okay, I've checked my box. We did the foreplay. Now we can get on to getting it inside and doing our thing. You know, um,
Yeah, man.
as opposed to there are layers of lovemaking and lots of different activities that can take place. And even if you're just looking at whether it's taking your time laying side by side and stroking one another or something along those lines, that's actually where typically women, and again ladies, sorry, I'm only speaking from communications that I've had, um, it seemed to gain a lot of pleasure.
Yeah.
And yes, they love to have orgasms too, um, but at the same time, the attention, the tenderness, the emotion is where they're really more so connecting. And so, although yes, they still get pleasure from those other activities, from actual intercourse or fellatio, whatever it is that you feel comfortable engaging in. Um, but it's a matter of making sure that her needs, which are usually more emotional than anything else, are
Yeah.
met first.
Oh yeah, and that's
So,
something that you know. I'm not going to dive deep into my personal life just because my wife probably wouldn't feel comfortable, but it is more about that emotional. Like it really is. If a woman is sharing her feelings with another guy, that's kind of her form of uh, cheating in a way. Like
mhm,
in a way. So a man, like he could have a conversation all day long. It's not going to do anything for him. And if you understand, like a lot of times a woman will feel upset with the husband if he is talking to other women about emotional things because for her, like that's the more important aspect of the relationship. And for most men, it's like I'm just trying to get this thing taken care of. And
right,
so, and usually, even with our spouse, a lot of times, a wrong view can be, I'm just trying to achieve this one goal instead of
right,
I'm really trying to connect with my wife right now. I'm trying to understand where she's at emotionally, where she's at spiritually. We can't
mhm,
forget that we're spirit-filled beings, so we need to be uh, kind of making sure we're good in that area too. Like usually, sex is the result of all of that,
right,
and that's one thing that we have to understand is like that's kind of the not the end goal, but the end result. There is a difference. There is a difference. That shouldn't be the goal because if that's the goal, then we're just trying to hurry up and skimmy through the important stuff to get to that, and that's not the important thing. And
right,
so I think we have to understand that. And for most men, it takes stepping back and saying like and like Shawn was saying, sometimes you just caress one another. Like, can I give my wife a back rub without expecting sex? Can I give her a
right,
foot rub without expecting sex? And if the answer is no, then you may want to check yourself. Like you may need to pray about it. Say, God, help me not have this incorrect view of my spouse.
yeah,
And again, we're speaking from man's perspective. I've never been a woman, so I can't tell you how a woman actually feels on the inside, other than what obviously Shawn and I have been uh, given information from our own personal spouses. But again, I think it's going back to getting to know. Like usually, my wife and I do much better if, like, even after like long conversations where we're just kind of we're vulnerable to one another. Like when I'm my most vulnerable, that's when I feel most connected with her. Like if
mhm,
I'm shutting myself off, if I'm not really expressing my true self, if I'm not giving her, uh, if I'm not putting myself in that weak and vulnerable state, then usually if we do have sex, it's not going to be quite as I don't know, as great. And I think that's, that's an issue
Which
for
has nothing to do with like orgasm, simultaneous or otherwise.
yeah.
There's always something far more in spiritual within that kind of connectedness, physical connectedness.
Yeah. And so, but and you think about it, a lot of times, you know, again going back to the vulnerability, like it's I think sometimes it can be hard for men and women to be vulnerable with one another, and so we try to skip that state of the relationship and go straight for the physical elements of it. And you can be, a person can be physical with anybody, but you can only really get emotional and really truly love and get to know somebody that you really 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 care about, and that makes the big difference between a good healthy marriage and just people who have one night stands or messing around or just dating casually, that kind of stuff. And so I think for men, our biggest challenge is kind of like Shawn said at the beginning, like don't objectify your wife and just think like, oh man, I can't wait to get home and XYZ. Not that you shouldn't look forward to having sex, but that shouldn't be like the main focus in your spouse. There was a situation I heard about where there was a wife who wasn't able to do that, and the husband was going to leave her, and he had to, like, he was almost at the point of divorce, and he finally realized this is not why I'm with my wife. Like, I got to be able to go without that and keep my vows to her.
Now, are you talking about just intercourse or some extra play, like
Uh,
oral?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it might have just been intercourse, but I'm not
Yeah.
100% positive.
The thing is that I know that a lot of guys seem to talk about oral sex a lot,
Yeah.
and that's probably the wife's biggest hang up. She doesn't like to do it. She won't, not to be too graphic, she won't swallow or whatever. But the point is that um, it's still not about your gratification.
Right.
um, when you're talking about that union, it is a spiritual connection. So what if your wife were served in the armed forces and had the lower half of her body blown up by an IED?
Yeah.
What then? You're just going to divorce her because she no longer has functioning parts for that sort of thing? I mean, come on. That shows how shallow your relationship is, first off with God, and then secondly is with your spouse. So definitely, if that's a hang up for you, I think you need to make sure that you're checking your relationship with God first, because that is where we learn to be able to love our spouse and how
Yeah.
important our spouse is to us. Um, and so then by natural extension we won't objectify our wives, and then our wives won't ever feel like, hey, my husband might be one of those guys that I've heard those stories about from other girlfriends. Your wife will be able to rest in assurance to know that my husband does his best to be, to follow God and to be all of what God has called him to be, and he puts me above even himself and in
Right.
his personal gratifications.
Yeah, man. So
All right.
I think that's good. I mean, we could talk about all different elements and aspects of sex and all that, but I think that's probably the most important one we can actually address,
Probably.
and without dragging this on and on and on. So, men, and obviously we're men, so we're speaking mostly to men. And I think most of our audience is men. It's please get this right. Please get this right. Go to counseling, something, anything. And obviously sex is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's not just for procreation. It is for enjoyment as well. And we can see that in the New Testament and Song of Solomon. Um, but I think clear communication's got to be there. I think the desire to want to serve your wife in that aspect needs to be there, and to be selfless needs to be there for there to be a healthy sex life. So yeah, man, sex on the porch. I hope that wasn't too graphic for y'all. And if you're again, if this has been helpful, let us know if there's other aspects and elements of this topic you would like us to address. We can try to do that in a future episode, future video, however you're consuming this. And yeah, man. So we do want to thank our sponsors for the show: Patreon, Sam Blackwell, Jason Motley. Thank you all so much for your support. TrueStrengthApparel.com. And go check out the new clothing gears over there. We want to thank Brutality for the early release, for the early, I don't know, listening to the album. We're grateful
Yeah,
for that.
well, and really that was Rottweiler Records that
Yeah,
hooked us
Rottweiler
up.
Records. Yeah, and also we're gonna put that coffee drink that we did a review on. We're gonna put that in this video segment as well, the recipe. So, but talk to your spouse about it. Let them know what you're doing. Don't just try to get all crazy.
And in fact, once you guys both share a drink,
There you
maybe
go.
Valentine's Day, and then
There you go. Have a great
explore and
Valentine's
see.
Day, everybody. We're going to end out the show this week for our podcast listeners with Empty Existence from Brutality from their upcoming album, Worldwide Desolation. So thank y'all so much for tuning in. I hope this has been a blessing for you, and we will see you next time. Always remember, Jesus loves you more than we ever could.
Peace.